The chandelier at the Dunmore Club cast a light that was not meant for people like Sylvie Holt. It was the kind of light that knew the difference. Warm where it touched crystal and gold, cold where it landed on the wrong dress, the wrong shoes, the wrong girl standing too close to the coat check because she didn't know where else to stand. Sylvie had been here for 11 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the clock above the bar. A clock that cost more than her monthly rent, ticking in a room full of people who had never once thought about rent. Her sister Claudine had promised it would be fine. Just come. You'll blend in. Nobody pays attention at these things. Claudine was currently across the room, laughing at something a man in a silk pocket square had said, her hand resting on his forearm like she'd known him for years. She hadn't looked back once. Sylvie shifted her weight. The strap of her handbag, bought second-hand, cleaned twice with a damp cloth, dug into her shoulder. She'd spent 40 minutes on her hair. She could feel it starting to fall. You actually came, she turned. Claudine had drifted back somehow without Sylvie noticing, a glass of champagne in hand, eyes moving over Sylvie's dress with the particular kind of look that took inventory and found it short. You said to come, Sylvie said. I didn't think you would. Claudine tilted her head. That dress is that the one from Mum's? The blue one she kept in the hall closet? It fits you. Claudine smiled, and it was the smile that had fooled people for years, wide and bright and containing absolutely nothing. Sylvie, you have to stop dressing like you're apologizing for being somewhere. Two women behind them had gone quiet. Sylvie felt it. That specific stillness of people who have chosen to listen. She didn't answer. She had learned a long time ago that answering Claudine in public was like trying to put out a fire with your hands. You only got burned. I'm getting a drink, Sylvie said. They're doing table assignments in 20 minutes. Claudine caught her arm briefly, told her, just to slow her. Try not to wander. You look lost when you wander. Sylvie walked to the bar. She asked for water. The bartender slid it to her without meeting her eyes, which was fine. She didn't need him to. She stood with her back to the room and her hands around the glass and breathed slowly through her nose the way her therapist had taught her 3 years ago before she'd had to stop going because the copay was too much. Behind her, the Dunmore Club hummed. Wealth had a sound. She'd learned that working collections at Heron Capital, listening to the phone ring differently depending on which floor you were on. Up here it was low and unhurried. The clink of glass. Laughter that came out in full sentences. No one rushed. No one was afraid of the time. She was thinking about the spreadsheet she'd left open on her laptop at home, the quarterly reconciliation for the Heron sub-accounts, due Monday, which she had been quietly doing wrong for 6 weeks before she figured out why, when the room changed. Not loudly, that was the thing she'd remember later. It didn't go silent the way rooms do in films, all at once like someone had flipped a switch. It went quiet the way water goes still. Gradually, and then completely, and by the time you noticed it had already happened. She turned because everyone turned. He was standing at the top of the 3 steps that led from the upper gallery down into the main floor of the club. He wasn't tall in the theatrical sense, not the tallest man in the room, but he stood like height was irrelevant. Like the space he occupied was simply correct in a way that rearranged everything around it. Dark suit, no tie. The collar of his shirt was open by 1 button, which on anyone else would have looked careless, and on him looked like a decision that had been made once and would not be revisited. His name moved through the room before he did. Roarke. Not his first name, just that. 1 syllable that landed like something dropped from a height. Sylvie had heard it before. Everyone in the financial sector in this city had heard it, the way you heard about weather before it arrived. Declan Roarke, 41. The kind of money that didn't show up in annual reports, because it wasn't that kind of money. The kind of man whose name appeared in documents that other people signed. He came down the steps. He moved through the room and people made way without appearing to, the way water moves around stone without deciding to. It was just physics, just the path of least resistance, and Roarke was the thing that resistance didn't quite apply to. Claudine materialized at Sylvie's elbow. Oh, she breathed. Oh, he actually came. I heard he might come, but I didn't. Do I look all right?" She was already smoothing her dress, already turning at an angle. "Sylvie, do I look all right?" "You look fine," Sylvie said. "Don't say fine. Fine is what you say to people you don't care about." Claudine was already moving, already charting a course across the marble floor with the precision of someone who had spent years learning which rooms mattered and how to enter them. Sylvie watched her go. She turned back to the bar and asked for something stronger. She was given a table assignment. Table 9, which was near the back, near the kitchen doors, the way the last seat on the train is near the coupling. She found it without help, sat down, introduced herself to the couple beside her. The Fentons, from Oakville. He was in insurance. She had a warm handshake and kind eyes. They talked about traffic on the QEW for 4 minutes, and Sylvie found herself genuinely grateful for it. The dinner was salmon. She ate it. From where she sat, she could see Claudine at table 2, which was near the center of the room, where the light was best, laughing at the right moments, touching her collarbone the way she did when she wanted a man to notice her neck. The man beside her, the one with the pocket square, was noticing. The man across from her was also noticing. Roarke was at table 1. He was not noticing Claudine. He was, as far as Sylvie could tell from this distance, not noticing anyone at the table. He had his knife in his hand, but he wasn't eating. He was listening to something the grey-haired man beside him was saying, and his face was doing almost nothing. And he had the look of a person who had been listening to things he did not want to hear for so long that the muscles required for visible reaction had simply stopped answering the call. He looked tired, not sleepy, not bored. Tired, the marrow kind, the kind you didn't fix with sleep. Sylvie looked away. It wasn't her business what Roarke looked like. The Fentons were asking her something about what she did for work. "Forensic accounting," she said. "I reconcile books. Find where the money went when it went somewhere it wasn't supposed to." "Oh," said Mrs. Fenton, "so like finding fraud. Sometimes it's just error. Sometimes someone made a mistake 6 years ago and didn't know how to fix it, and then another mistake to cover it, and then the mistakes compound until the books look like a language nobody speaks anymore." She shrugged. "I translate it back. That sounds..." Mrs. Fenton paused. "Important. It's not glamorous," Sylvie said. "Important things rarely are," said Mrs. Fenton, and she said it like she meant it, which meant Sylvie had to look at her plate for a moment. She was in the corridor near the cloakroom, waiting for her coat and fighting with the paper number the coat check attendant had given her. The corners had torn and the ink was smudged, when she heard Claudine's voice coming from around the corner. Honestly, I don't know what she was thinking. Coming. I invited her to be kind. You know how it is with family. Laughter. Male. More than one voice. She does these numbers for some small firm, completely mid-level. She's always been very practical. Not practical in an interesting way. Practical like she's afraid of anything that costs too much. A pause. She's my sister, I love her, but she's the kind of person who brings spreadsheets to a dinner party. More laughter. Sylvie stood very still. She was good at standing still. She had been standing still in corridors like this, figuratively, literally, her entire adult life, listening to Claudine explain her to rooms full of people who had no reason to care. Practical. Claudine always said it like a diagnosis. The coat check attendant came back with her jacket, and Sylvie thanked her quietly and turned toward the main exit and stopped walking when she realized she had stopped breathing. Just for a second. Just long enough to notice. She made herself breathe again. She was 3 steps from the door when someone said her name. Not Claudine's version of it, not the slightly clipped way. Claudine said Sylvie like she was mildly surprised it was still the name she'd been given. This was said carefully, like someone reading it off a document. She turned. Roarke was standing 4 feet away from her. He was closer than she'd expected. People like him usually had a perimeter, an invisible but agreed-upon distance that others kept, and she had to recalibrate slightly to account for how much space he occupied without taking up any more room than he had. He was looking at her with the focused, impersonal attention of someone reading a balance sheet. "Sylvie Holt," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said, "because what else do you say? You work for Heron Capital. She didn't ask how he knew that. People like Roarke knew things. That was the commodity. Not the money, not even the power, but the knowing. I do. You found the error in the Meridian sub-accounts. The blood in her veins went slightly sideways. The Meridian accounts were internal. What she'd found in those accounts, the buried discrepancy that had compounded over 4 years, the siphoned amounts that had been redistributed through 3 layers of holding companies, was not public. It wasn't even officially documented yet. She'd flagged it to her supervisor last Thursday, in a meeting that had lasted 6 minutes and ended with her supervisors telling her to sit on it until after the quarter closed. "That's a fairly specific thing to know about," she said. "Yes." He didn't apologize for knowing it. "You sat on it, I was told to, and you're still sitting on it." She looked at him for a long moment. His face was still doing almost nothing, but she had the distinct and uncomfortable sense that he was reading her the same way she read corrupted spreadsheets, looking for the place where the numbers stopped adding up correctly. "What do you want?" she said. He tilted his head, a small movement, like she'd said something slightly unexpected, but not unpleasant. "I want to know what else you found." "I don't know," he said, "but you know what you found and you know what happens when someone buries it again." She did know. She'd been trying not to think about it in the specific terms it deserved since Thursday, but she knew. The money didn't stop moving just because you stopped watching it. It kept going, kept redistributing, kept finding the next layer. "I need to get my coat," she said. "I'm leaving." "I know," he said. "I'm asking you to sit down for 10 minutes first. I'm not sitting down with you in a room full of people who—" She stopped. She wasn't sure how to finish that sentence in a way that made her sound less frightened than she was. "Not here," he said. "There's a side room they use for meetings. Quiet, empty. I'll have someone get your coat." She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. Knew it with the same certainty she'd known in 6 weeks of quiet work, that the Meridian books were wrong before she could prove it. Not a feeling, just the math. Just the shape of the thing before she had the numbers to confirm it. But she was also a person who had spent her whole career following things she'd found to their end, even when she'd been told not to, even when the end turned out to be a room with no doors. 10 minutes, she said. The side room had a table and 4 chairs and a lamp that was slightly too dim, which suited Sylvie fine. She sat with her handbag in her lap and her coat across the back of the chair and watched Roarke close the door. He sat across from her. Not beside her, across, with the width of the table between them, which she appreciated. He put a folder on the table. "I'm not signing anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to." She looked at the folder. "What's in it?" "The same thing you found," he said, "from a different angle, from outside the Heron accounts." She felt the specific alertness that came for her, not from coffee or adrenaline, but from numbers that wanted to tell her something she hadn't figured out yet. "You've been watching the Meridian accounts. I've been watching what moves through them." He opened the folder and turned it to face her. She leaned forward. The numbers were laid out cleanly. Someone meticulous had done this. Someone who understood that data presented sloppily was data that could be dismissed. She looked at the columns. She looked at the dates. She looked at the routing. "These amounts," she said slowly. "Yes. These aren't errors," she looked up. "These are payments." "Yes. For what?" Roarke was quiet for a moment. In the quiet she could hear, distantly, the sounds of the Gala continuing. Music now, low strings, someone's laugh that rose and disappeared. "My organization lent Heron Capital a significant amount of money in 2019, he said, through instruments that were designed to be untrackable. The arrangement was that the money would be returned through the Meridian sub-accounts over 4 years. Sylvie absorbed this. "The money stopped moving 8 months ago," he said. "Someone inside Heron rerouted it. We don't know who." She looked at the numbers again. She thought about the discrepancy she'd found, the pattern of it, the way it had been restructured midstream, not clumsily but not quite skillfully enough, like someone who knew numbers but didn't know them the way she did, didn't know the way they left traces the way water leaves tide marks on stone. "You want me to find out who," she said. "I want to know where the money went. The who follows from that. And what happens to the who when you know? Roarke looked at her with eyes that were a grey-brown she couldn't name, the colour of water in late November. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They were both adults in a room together, and she had looked up his name on a Thursday afternoon, and she was not someone who pretended not to know things to make herself more comfortable. "This is not the kind of work I do for people," she said. "Professionally." "No," he said. "Professionally, you do it for firms that bury it anyway." That landed. She sat with it for a moment. "I want access to the full Meridian archives," she said. "Everything from 2018 to present. Not summaries. Raw data. Done. I work alone. No one watches me work. No one reviews my process. Fine. If I find something that implicates me or my team in this, in any way." "It won't," he said. "I've already looked." She stopped. "I've been watching the Heron accounts for 8 months, he said. It was said flatly, without apology, which she was beginning to understand, was simply how he said things. "You're not in this. You're not even adjacent to it. You're the person who found it by accident because you're better at this than anyone who was paid to not find it." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's not a compliment," she said. "That's a job offer." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "Yes, it is." "I haven't said yes." "No," he said. "You haven't." She looked at the folder. She looked at the numbers in it. She thought about her supervisor telling her to sit on it, and the way the accounts had looked on Thursday evening on her screen. The shape of them. The wrongness of them. The specific feeling of standing in front of a door that she'd already technically opened. "I'll need somewhere to work that isn't my apartment," she said. "There's a space. I'll need it to have good light. I'm on a computer for 12 hours straight sometimes. Bad light gives me headaches." Roarke blinked, which was not the response she'd expected. "I'll have it arranged," he said. "And I want whatever I find to go somewhere real," she said. "I'm not finding it for you to bury it somewhere different. I'm not exchanging one bad ceiling for another." He was quiet for a moment. "What counts as somewhere real?" he said. "I'll know when I get there," she said. "And so will you." He nodded once. She picked up the folder. She held it in both hands like what it was. Not a contract, not a weapon, just paper, just numbers, just the shape of something that had been wrong for a long time before anyone with the right eyes had looked at it. "The people at Heron who told you to sit on this," he said. He said it carefully, watching her. "Are you worried about them?" She thought about her supervisor. She thought about the meeting that had lasted 6 minutes. She thought about the way the door had been shut on the way out, very quietly, like something sealed. "I'm not worried about them," she said. "I'm done with them. There's a difference." Roarke looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had just read a line in an accounting ledger that told them something the summary page had deliberately left out. He stood. "The space will be ready Thursday morning," he said. 7 a.m. "I'm not a morning person," she said. 8, he said without missing a beat. She stood. She put her coat on. She picked up her bag. She was at the door before she stopped and turned back, not because she'd forgotten anything, but because there was one more thing. "Your money," she said. "The amount that was rerouted. If I find it, and I will find it, I can tell you where it is. I can trace every move it made. But what you do with that information is yours." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it so I can remember that I said it," she said. "So there's no misunderstanding later about what I agreed to." He tilted his head again. That same small movement. "Understood," he said. She walked out. The gala was still going. The strings were still playing. Someone had opened the windows to the terrace, and the October air had found its way in, cold and real against the warm, expensive air inside. She walked through it and found the front door and stepped out into the dark of a Wednesday night in November, the kind of dark that felt like permission. Behind her, through the glass, she could see Claudine laughing at something at table 2. She kept walking. She was back in her apartment by 10:30. The spreadsheet was still open on her laptop. The cursor blinked in the cell she'd left it in, waiting. She pulled her chair out and sat down, still in her coat, and stared at the numbers for a long time. They stared back. She thought about the look on Rourke's face when she'd said, "I'll know when I get there." the way it had registered, not as a challenge, not as naivety, but as something he filed carefully away somewhere. She thought about the folder. She thought about the shape of the accounts in it, the exact sequence of movements, the care that had been taken to disguise them, and the tiny places where the disguise had slipped, because disguise always slipped, because no one was thorough enough when they were frightened, and whoever had rerouted Roarke's money had been frightened. She could already see the thread. She saved the file. She closed the laptop. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door, the second-hand one, the clean one, and stood in the quiet of her apartment, which was small and had good natural light in the morning and cost exactly as much as she could afford and not 1 cent more. She thought about what Roarke had said. "You're better at this than anyone who was paid to not find it." Not a compliment. She knew that. She'd said so herself. But she also knew the difference between a man who said things to make you feel important and a man who said things because they were accurate. Roarke was not in the business of making people feel important. He was in the business of accurate. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a while, and when she did, she dreamed about numbers. Not anxiously, not the nightmare kind, but the other kind, the kind that came when she was close to something. Ordered. Almost there. The feeling of a pattern about to resolve. Thursday, she thought. 8 a.m., she was already in some part of her mind she couldn't quite shut off, already there.